One of the most fascinating works I've come across in the last few decades of research was a book titled Thunderbolts of the Gods. In it, authors David Talbot and Walter Thornhill made a solid case for the different alignment of the planets in ancient times, an alignment that allowed the ancient civilizations to see cosmic events with their naked eye. More so, they captured the events in rock art that we have overlooked as primitive, when in fact it's giving us a fascinating history of Earth's past. David Talbot is here today to share his findings on this, and I've looked forward to meeting you for a long time. As we found out, everybody at GAIM's been looking forward to your arrival.
Very glad to be here.
When you start adding the newer technology, cosmological technology, Hubble and the like, where we're now able to actually glimpse into, through a lens, but glimpse into the phenomena that's out there that we are no longer able to see with our naked eye. It's validating the rock art.
Well, and you asked me about the cosmic thunderbolt, and I should have actually, I should have drawn that to a decisive point in the history of the research.
Okay, let me give you this. This is out of your book.
Yeah.
It is the thunderbolt that steers the universe. We have a beautiful image of this. Now, let's talk about that.
Indeed. The cosmic thunderbolt was, for me, my bridge to the research of Wal Thornhill, who is the premier investigator within the electric universe community. There are many others, but Wal Thornhill came to Portland, Oregon, late in 1996, and he had seen these reconstructions of my own. And he was so convinced of the meaning of that reconstruction that he stayed in my office for 30 days to persuade me that these were electric discharge phenomena, his specialty. And I was completely persuaded. For this reason, once it became clear to me that the mythic thunderbolt in the antique world was a bridge between the electric universe and my own work, we had the most natural convergence between us. So Thunderbolts of the Gods actually gives us a point of common discussion, because as you said, the Hubble telescope and other telescopes are now looking out across the entire electromagnetic spectrum, and they're seeing spectacular events in the sky, and guess what? They reveal similarities to the cosmic thunderbolt.
Yes.
And this is well worth investigating, because I mean, I can tell you no one historically wondering about what was acting on human imagination ever even dreamt of something electrical in the sky.
Yet once
actually
you point
inspiring
it out,
these images. And then once it's open for discussion, everybody can see it. And that's what we're experiencing right now.
That's what your work is so beautiful.
There's this sense now of a spectacular unification of thought now about the origins of human religions, institutional interpretations of things that have made no sense to us, all of the ritual practices, the magical practices, the superstitions, the rock art, as you said, all the great artistic motifs that dominated the early phases of human history, the beginnings of languages in pictographs that are inseparable from those artistic traditions. The pictographs evolving into abstractions that become alphabets and so on. This is just such an interesting field, because in the points of agreement between all of the ancient cultures, there are certain forms that stand out. Now, one, for example, is this stupendous wheel turning in the sky.
Yes.
Just a wheel in the sky, and an axle of the wheel, and spokes that are the extension of a star that is the hub of the wheel with the axle in the center of it. I mean, just describing it in words, many people who are familiar with ancient art, they'll say, oh yeah, well that is it. There's the wheel, the rim of the wheel, the axles, there's the hub, and then there's the axle. But did you know that the axle was identified as the warrior hero? Well, what does that mean? The moment you recognize that, you have libraries of evidence that are opening up to you. And then you hear that, well, that star was identified as the planet Venus.
Yes.
And you see there are these streamers that actually are suggestive of electric discharge. There's a symmetry to them, and there is symmetry to electric discharge activity. What was happening to the planet Venus that identified it as the hub and the spokes of this spectacular turning wheel in the sky? And then you begin to notice, well, this wasn't just an esoteric thought that occurred to them. They were building temples and cities, and they were using this wheel as the model for them. These were the wheel cities and so on. So all of this monumental activity, which was fundamentally commemorative, a monument is a commemoration of something, and we just draw blanks when we look back at this stuff. We don't see commemoration of anything meaningful.
No, not at all. It just looks like primitive art, and partially because even as children, what are some of the most common things we draw? It would be a sun like a spoked wheel. It would be little five-pointed stars. These are the most natural expressions globally of children around the world that we start drawing as soon as we're able to hold our pencils in our hands.
This is in the area of more speculation, lower level of confidence than the reconstruction itself, but there's evidence that the events and the formations in the sky that were experienced persisted in the human psyche as subconscious strata. I mean, this is what Carl Jung was saying, but he never wondered where did these archetypes come from. But we're simply saying, hey, extraordinary natural events provoked an outpouring of human imagination, and those are the mythic archetypes.
Well, and as above, so below.
Exactly.
You cannot disconnect our electrical matrix with the cosmos.
There must be much more to that connectivity than we've even dreamt of.
Velikovsky's hypothesis about the origins of humankind rocked your world. Now let's just set this conversation up with why.
Well, at the core of Velikovsky's work, I mean, this was the culminating work really in his life, was the idea that the planetary system that we know today is new. Planets haven't always moved on these courses. Science has been saying with full confidence that planets have always moved on these courses.
Everything's fixed.
So science as a whole did not take kindly to Velikovsky's pronouncement that the planet Venus was new and that it was formerly a comet, and it was devastating in its impact on all of humanity. And to say this, he committed a crime. He used ancient myths and legends and primitive astronomical accounts to verify the claimed role of Venus as a world-threatening comet, and that was not permissible. And so Velikovsky not only saw his #1 bestseller dropped by the publisher, Macmillan, but this was a very distinguished scientist, a colleague of Sigmund Freud and of Albert Einstein, for example, who lost all of his credibility in the eyes of mainstream scientists. And that's a story unto itself, the devastating impact that had on Velikovsky personally. But the space age, fortunately, followed the publication of Worlds in Collision.
Yes.
And the thing about facts coming back to us from space is that they didn't lend any veracity to the ideas that were used against Velikovsky. I mean, this is just the historic record. We can no more say that planets have always moved on the same courses as they do today. I mean, all of the historical evidence now, as we begin to actually look at it systematically and logically, rationally, the evidence says that civilization as a whole emerged out of wholesale catastrophe. That was on their minds day and night.
And this is in the mythology.
It's all in the mythology, and mythology has an explanation in concrete experiences, concrete forms in the sky, concrete sequences of events, and all we need to do is pose the question. That's my message in a nutshell. We just pose the question. because Velikovsky forged a path for us with his claims about the planet Venus. He noticed that different cultures were using different words and different symbols, but they were all within the context of these cultures, symbols and words for comets.
Yes, and this is really your work, and what you're looking for is to find the consistency between this global imagery and these global stories. And you're saying science really has been foolish to totally dismiss these consistencies throughout our history and throughout our religions and cultures.
But we can, I think, be sympathetic with that mistake. There's a fundamental error of perception, but we can appreciate it in one sense. It's all absurd. I mean, just consider the absurdities of the ancient myth. I mean, the absurdity of a dragon attacking a village.
Yes.
Follow that absurdity backwards and you get to a much bigger absurdity. That dragon was actually attacking the world. The world is progressively reduced by storytelling, that archaic world.
Yes.
So now this is our village was attacked by this dragon, and it carried off the princess.
But cosmologically, what was the dragon?
It was this huge and terrifying form of the comet Venus.
Yes.
Now, I'm oversimplifying everything here because there was a dynamic relationship between plasma phenomena centered on Venus and a connection to the planet Mars. This, you have to get into the reconstruction a bit to see that that is so. But Venus was the mother of all comets. Now,
terrifying in the sky.
Terrifying,
to the
and everything that the ancient peoples ever said about comets. It was planted in their minds by the great comet, Venus. So a comet appears into view, oh my God, the world is going to come to an end. Well,
that's collective memory.
It's collective memory.
Yes.
Exactly so. It's every culture was influenced by the same human experience, and Venus was a comet. So Venus was a comet, and the imagery that conditioned all of our doomsday fears about comets can be traced right back to the great comet. And when they say the comet appears in the sky and the king is going to die, the kingdom is going to fall, I mean, that's the story of the great comet. And it was Venus, the eye, heart, and soul of this stupendous power
and it was
that
global.
Velikovsky identified as Saturn. So these planets are inseparably connected to each other. You can't take a myth about the warrior hero, identify it with Mars, and stop there. No, you have to see the warrior hero was the consort of the goddess who was Venus. The goddess Venus was originally the eye, heart, and soul of a universal sovereign figure, a towering form in the sky, identified as the primeval sun ruling before the present sun. Now, this is a global convergence of myth, and the planets cannot be separated from each other. That's the heart of it.
You're showing how the cosmos has been reflected throughout history, and there is cross-cultural agreement, as you say, and that is critical to giving credence to this story again.
That's key, and the process of reasoning from evidence can be spelled out in detail, and following the protocol for drawing reliable conclusions from unreliable witnesses, just like a detective would do. You know how a detective would say, well, you know, they're not all saying the same thing, but, you know, they all 10 said this. It's very specific. That can't be false. They weren't talking to each other. Now, the early cultures weren't talking to each other either. So highly concrete points of agreement. Just, for example, the warrior hero descends to the underworld, and it's in connection with the formation of a great cosmic mountain or world pillar rising along the world axis. Well, that's so specific. If that doesn't have a reason, a cause, then something just isn't adding up at all. It has to have a cause because the evidence, the stories are there. And they couldn't be there by accident.